Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment when your silence becomes louder than every word he ever ignored. When he pulled away, you didn't chase, you went quiet. And that quiet, it terrified him. Because silence isn't weakness, it's power. It's the moment he realizes the attention he took for granted has vanished. The moment he feels your absence more deeply than he ever appreciated your presence. Stay right here, because what happens next will make you understand why silence isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning of your power. When a man pulls away, it's easy to feel a sense of panic rising inside you. You start replaying every conversation, every moment, wondering what went wrong. You question yourself, did I say something that pushed him away? Did I show too much emotion? Was I too available? It's that emotional spiral that traps so many women. But here's the truth. His withdrawal isn't always about you. Sometimes it's about his fears, his ego, or his inability to process emotions. And the most powerful thing you can do in that moment is not chase clarity, but choose silence. Because silence speaks the language of strength. Most people think silence is weakness, that saying nothing means you've given up. But in reality, silence is an act of emotional intelligence. It's choosing not to react impulsively when everything in you wants to reach out. It's the art of emotional detachment. Not because you don't care, but because you value your self-respect more than you crave validation. When you stop responding to his distance, you stop feeding the dynamic that's draining you. You stop rewarding inconsistency. And that's when everything begins to shift. Think about what happens when someone expects you to chase them. They pull back to see if you'll fight harder for their attention. They want to confirm their power. But when you don't react, when you simply retreat into your calm silence, it disrupts their pattern. It makes them question the certainty they once had about your feelings. It tells them, without saying a single word, that you're not afraid to walk away from confusion. That's not indifference. That's self-worth. Emotional detachment doesn't mean shutting off your feelings or pretending you don't care. It means you've learned to regulate your emotions so they no longer control you. It means you can feel disappointment without needing to chase closure. It means you can love someone deeply and still refuse to abandon your dignity. That's the difference between attachment and strength. When you stay silent after he pulls away, you're no longer playing the same emotional game. He expects panic, reaction, maybe even begging, because that's what happens when someone feels rejected. But you're not reacting. You're reflecting. You're observing your own emotions instead of acting on them. And in doing so, you send a message far more powerful than any text could deliver. I respect myself enough not to chase confusion. Silence isn't passive, it's active restraint. It's the moment you take your power back. Because in relationships, whoever needs more control loses control. The one who can't sit in uncertainty will always be at the mercy of the other. Your silence proves you can tolerate uncertainty. You can let things unfold without forcing them. That calm confidence is magnetic. It's what separates a woman of depth from a woman who's desperate. Men are wired to feel attraction through challenge and respect. When you constantly pursue him, explain yourself, or try to fix what's broken, you remove that natural tension. He feels in control, and ironically, that control makes him lose interest. But when you step back, when your energy becomes unavailable, it activates a completely different instinct in him. Suddenly, he has to wonder. He has to think. He has to face the possibility that he's losing something real. That's when curiosity begins to turn into value. Silence also exposes truth. When you stop reaching out, you give him space to reveal his intentions. Does he step forward again, or does he stay gone? Does he realize your worth, or does he take your absence as freedom? Whatever he does tells you everything you need to know. And you didn't even have to ask. Your silence becomes your filter. It separates the emotionally unavailable from the emotionally ready. There's a quiet beauty in detachment because it shifts your focus inward. Instead of analyzing him, you start reconnecting with yourself. You begin to remember who you were before you started waiting for his attention. You rediscover your confidence, your hobbies, your energy. That glow you had when you weren't seeking anyone's approval begins to return. And ironically, that's the very energy that often makes him come back. The energy of a woman who's centered in her own life. When he feels your silence, he starts to feel something he didn't expect: loss. Not because you said anything dramatic, but because you stopped saying anything at all. He remembers the warmth of your presence, your laughter, your support. He starts to miss the emotional safety he once felt with you. But this time, he's the one feeling the absence. And that's when true reflection begins, when he's forced to see what life feels like without your energy. This silence, however, isn't about making him chase. That's a byproduct, not the goal. The real goal is emotional freedom. You're teaching yourself that you don't have to beg for clarity or fight for love. You can choose peace over anxiety. You can allow distance without collapsing. You can let go without losing yourself. That's what emotional maturity looks like: loving deeply, but never at the cost of your self-respect. So when you go silent, you're not just responding to his behavior. You're redefining the dynamic. You're saying, if you're unsure, that's fine. But I won't fill the silence for you. I won't carry both sides of the connection. And that silence creates space, not just for him to reflect, but for you to reset. You get to see the situation for what it is, not what you hoped it would be. You begin to realize that silence isn't empty. It's full of answers. It's in that silence that you find clarity. You notice how your anxiety starts to calm down when you stop chasing explanations. You realize how much energy you were giving to someone who wasn't giving equally. You start to feel proud that you didn't lower your standards for temporary comfort. Proud that you didn't let fear dictate your actions. That pride turns into peace, and that peace becomes your new standard. And here's something most people never understand. Silence changes how others perceive you. When you stop over-explaining, you become mysterious again. When you stop chasing, you become rare. When you stop reacting, you become powerful. People sense your emotional control and they respect it, even if they can't fully articulate why. Because silence demands presence, it demands effort. And in a world full of noise, the person who can stay quiet stands out the most. That's why emotional detachment isn't cold. It's commanding. It's the quiet confidence of someone who knows their value doesn't depend on being chosen. It's the grace of someone who can love deeply and still walk away when love isn't mutual. It's the maturity to say, I don't need to prove my worth to someone who can't see it. That's the kind of power no one can take from you. Because it's not about controlling anyone else. It's about mastering yourself. When a man pulls away, the first instinct most women feel is confusion, followed quickly by fear. You wonder what changed. One moment he was warm, attentive, even vulnerable, and then suddenly he's distant, quieter, less available. You can feel the shift before he even says a word. The conversations shorten, the enthusiasm fades. You sense that emotional door starting to close. And it hurts because it feels personal. But here's what you need to understand when he withdraws. It's not always a rejection. Sometimes it's just space. And how you handle that space determines everything that happens next. Human connection is built on rhythm, closeness and distance, approach and retreat. It's part of attraction. Men especially often pull away not because they've lost interest, but because they're processing something internally. Maybe it's fear of vulnerability. Maybe it's a need to feel control again. Maybe it's confusion about their emotions. But when you immediately chase that space by calling, texting, asking, what's wrong, you interrupt that natural rhythm. Instead of allowing him to process, you pressure him to explain something he doesn't yet understand himself. And that only pushes him further away. Silence, on the other hand, is a form of trust. It's saying, I'll give you the space you need, and I trust myself enough to stay calm while you figure it out. That silence creates what psychologists call a psychological void. It's the moment where your absence becomes noticeable. You're no longer supplying attention, affection, or emotional reassurance. And that absence creates a vacuum, one that naturally draws curiosity, because human beings are wired to notice what disappears. At first, he may feel relief from the distance, as if he's reclaiming a sense of autonomy. But over time, that relief turns into reflection. He starts to notice the quiet, the lack of your presence, the absence of your voice, your laughter, your emotional energy. It's subtle at first, like the echo of something familiar that's no longer there. But as days pass, he begins to wonder, did she move on? Did I lose her? That uncertainty awakens his emotional mind, not his logical one. It makes him feel something he's been avoiding since he pulled away. What most people don't realize is that emotional space works both ways. When you go silent, you're not just giving him room, you're giving yourself room too. Room to breathe, to observe, to detach from your own emotional panic. You start to see things more clearly. You realize that chasing him wouldn't have solved anything, it would have only blurred the truth. Silence helps you separate your emotions from his actions. It helps you recognize whether his distance was a temporary fear or a permanent disinterest. The psychology of pursuit is rooted in one key principle: we value what we must earn. When you were available, when your attention flowed easily, he might have unconsciously started taking it for granted. It's not because he's cruel, it's human nature. We adapt to consistency. We become numb to what's always there. But when you pull that energy back, when you stop feeding the dynamic, he begins to feel the contrast. He starts missing what he assumed would always be available. There's something deeply magnetic about a woman who can remain composed in uncertainty. Most people chase when they feel ignored. They send another text, call again, or post something just to get attention. But when you do none of that, when your silence is calm and grounded, you stand out. He notices that your world didn't crumble without his attention, that you didn't lose your center when he pulled away. That composure shifts something in him psychologically. It forces him to reassess your value, not because you demanded it, but because you embodied it. In relationships, silence is like emotional gravity. It draws people back into awareness. It gives them time to feel what life is like without your energy. It allows emotions to settle so genuine connection can resurface. But here's the catch: silence only works when it comes from authenticity. If you're being silent just to manipulate him into chasing you, it won't create the same effect. Because underneath that silence is still attachment, still anxiety. He'll feel that energy. True silence, the kind that transforms dynamics, comes from peace, not pretense. When your silence is rooted in confidence, it's powerful. It communicates that you don't need validation to feel secure, that you can hold your own even in moments of emotional distance, that you're not afraid of losing someone who doesn't value you. That message penetrates deeper than any words ever could. Because most men are used to women trying to close the gap immediately. When you don't, when you stay still and grounded, it creates mystery. He starts to wonder, how is she so calm? Does she not miss me? Did I misread her feelings? That curiosity grows until it becomes a need to know. And that's when the pursuit dynamic shifts. He begins to take action again. He might reach out subtly at first, a simple text, a like on your post, a casual, hey, how have you been? It's his way of testing the waters, trying to gauge whether your silence was final or intentional. But the key here is not to rush in with relief. Don't fill the silence immediately with excitement or explanations. Let him come forward. Let him experience what it feels like to earn your energy again. That's not playing games. That's restoring balance. Silence also reveals emotional maturity. It's the ability to respond to discomfort with patience instead of panic. When you can sit in that uncertainty without trying to fix it, you communicate self-control. And that control is incredibly attractive because what every person, man or woman, craves at their core is safety. And a person who's emotionally stable feels safe to be around. Your silence tells him that his temporary withdrawal doesn't control your mood. That stability, that poise becomes your power. Another powerful element of silence is that it forces him to confront his feelings without distraction. When you're not reaching out, he can't blame his confusion on your pressure. He has to sit with himself, his guilt, his fear, his longing. And in that stillness, he starts to understand the emotional impact of losing you. That's where realization grows. Not when you talk, not when you explain, but when you're gone. Silence is often the mirror that shows him what words never could. The value of your presence. Over time, he may begin to romanticize the connection again. The moments he once took for granted now play differently in his mind. The memory of your laughter, your warmth, your patience, they start to glow brighter against the backdrop of silence, and that's when regret begins to whisper. Not loud and dramatic, but soft, insistent. It tells him he lost something real. and that feeling lingers. The beauty of this dynamic is that whether he returns or not, you've already grown. You've learned to trust space instead of fear it. You've discovered that silence isn't emptiness. It's reflection. You've realized that you don't have to fill every gap with words to prove your worth. Sometimes the strongest move is simply not to move at all. That restraint gives you clarity. It lets you see who truly values your presence, not because you reminded them, but because they felt it. And that's the hidden power behind your silence. It's not punishment, it's a boundary. It's your way of saying, I'm here for real connection, not emotional confusion. When you stop trying to convince someone to stay, you give space for the right ones to come closer naturally. Your silence becomes your filter. It shows you who is capable of matching your energy and who only responded to your attention. And through that process, you evolve. You start to attract people who don't make you question your place. People who value peace as much as you do. People who stay, not because you chase, but because your silence spoke to their soul louder than any words ever could. Your silence is not a punishment, it's a declaration. It says, I don't beg for love. I attract it. It's not about arrogance or pride, it's about clarity. The kind of clarity that comes from knowing your worth so deeply that you refuse to trade it for temporary attention. When you choose silence after someone pulls away, you're not acting out of spite. You're acting out of self-respect. You're saying, if you can't meet me with presence, then I'll meet myself with peace. That's not weakness. That's the ultimate form of strength. In a world where everyone is desperate to be seen and heard, silence becomes rare, and rare is powerful. Silence is misunderstood because it looks passive from the outside. But real silence, the kind that comes from strength, is an active choice. It's emotional discipline in its highest form. It's holding yourself steady when every part of you wants to reach out, explain, or prove your worth. It's mastering the art of restraint, and that restraint is what gives you presence. When someone pulls away, the urge to chase is fueled by fear, fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. But silence requires trust, trust in yourself and trust in the truth. It says, if this connection is real, it will return. And if it's not, no amount of noise will make it stay. That mindset shifts your energy completely. Instead of chasing reassurance, you begin to radiate calm certainty. And that certainty is magnetic, because while words can be ignored, energy cannot. Silence changes the dynamic because it removes pressure. It allows the other person to feel your absence without resentment. When you stop forcing conversations, you give space for authenticity to surface. If he cares, if he'll step into that silence. If he doesn't, you'll have your answer. And you'll have preserved your dignity in the process. That's the power of silence. It reveals truth without confrontation. It exposes intentions without you needing to ask. There's something deeply graceful about a woman who can remain silent in chaos. She doesn't fight for attention. She doesn't prove her worth through explanation. She simply holds her ground, rooted in emotional balance. That composure unsettles people who are used to controlling you through your reactions, because your silence breaks the pattern. It tells them they can no longer access you through confusion or inconsistency. It's not about ignoring. It's about protecting your energy. When you choose silence, you're telling the universe, I'm not afraid to be alone with myself. That's rare, because most people fear silence, not just with others, but within themselves. They fill every quiet moment with noise, distraction, and conversation because silence forces self-reflection. But when you can sit in that silence and feel at peace, you become emotionally untouchable. You no longer need constant reassurance because you've built your own. You've found validation within. And that's what makes you powerful. Your silence is your mirror. It reflects everything. Your growth, your boundaries, your peace. It shows how far you've come from the person who once needed closure from others to feel whole. Now, you give that closure to yourself. You no longer chase understanding because you understand you. That's what makes silence sacred. It's where you reconnect with your intuition. You start hearing your own voice again. You start remembering what you deserve. You realize that not everyone who enters your life deserves access to your energy. When a man senses that kind of silence, not the cold, vengeful kind, but the calm, self-assured kind, it changes everything. He feels it. Because silence forces him to sit with the consequences of his actions. It makes him realize that your attention wasn't guaranteed, that your love was never owed, it was offered. And when he sees you detached yet peaceful, it triggers both respect and curiosity. He begins to wonder, how did she stay so calm? Why isn't she chasing me? That question is powerful because it leads to introspection. It makes him feel your absence not as punishment, but as loss. Silence is the emotional boundary that most people never master. It's not about cutting someone off. It's about creating emotional distance where respect can either grow or disappear. If it grows, the connection strengthens because it's built on awareness. If it fades, then you've saved yourself from emotional exhaustion. Either way, you win, because silence ensures you're no longer participating in dynamics that drain you. Another layer of silence's power lies in the mystery it creates. When you stop explaining yourself, you become unpredictable. When you stop reacting, you become intriguing. People are drawn to what they can't fully understand. And when you're silent, you give them something to figure out. That mystery reignites interest, not because you're playing games, but because you've reclaimed your energy. You've become selective again. And in a world where everyone overshares, selectiveness is seductive. Silence also helps you observe. When you stop talking, you start seeing. You notice who reaches out when you pull back. You see who values you when you're no longer convenient. You witness who tries to reconnect and who simply lets the silence continue. You learn more from what people do in silence than from what they say in conversation. Words can lie. Actions in silence never do. Your silence also becomes your filter. It teaches you who can handle your boundaries and who can't. Some people will interpret your silence as rejection. They'll get angry or defensive because they can't control it. Others will interpret it as peace. They'll respect your space and come back with sincerity. The ones who truly value, you will recognize that your silence isn't meant to hurt, it's meant to protect the connection. Because silence, when rooted in self-respect, is love in its most disciplined form. When you stay silent, you begin to notice a shift inside you. The emotional chaos quiets down. The urge to explain fades. You feel lighter, because you're no longer trying to manage anyone else's emotions. You're simply managing your own. That internal peace radiates outward. People can feel it. They may not know why, but they sense that you're no longer operating from need. You're operating from choice. And that choice gives you presence. Presence is the foundation of attraction. It's not about what you say or do. It's about the energy you carry when you do nothing at all. When your silence comes from calm confidence, it commands attention. It tells the world, I'm not chasing anyone. I'm choosing myself. That quiet assurance draws people in. Not because you're trying to be noticed, but because you've become unshakable. And nothing is more attractive than peace that can't be disrupted. Your silence also teaches emotional responsibility. It shows that you won't react to every emotional wave that comes your way. That you can experience disappointment without losing dignity. That you can feel pain without creating drama. This kind of emotional mastery earns you deep respect, not just from others, but from yourself. You begin to admire your own restraint. You start seeing silence not as emptiness, but as evidence of your evolution. The most empowering part of silence is that it reclaims time to focus on your purpose, your goals, your happiness. When you're not caught up in chasing or overthinking, you have energy for what actually fulfills you. You start glowing differently because your attention is no longer scattered. You've redirected it inward, and that's when you truly grow. Silence doesn't mean disconnecting from emotion. It means mastering it. It means you've learned when to speak and when to step back. It's the quiet confidence that doesn't need validation to feel whole. Because deep down, you already know real connection doesn't require noise. It recognizes peace. It feels your energy even in your silence. And once you've learned to harness that kind of quiet strength, you'll never fear distance again. When he pulls away and you respond with silence, something profound begins to unfold beneath the surface. You might not see it right away, but the energy between you shifts. The dynamic that once gave him power over your emotions starts to dissolve, and the balance quietly returns to you. Because your silence changes the rhythm of the connection. He expected a reaction. a text, a question, a plea for understanding. But instead, he's met with stillness. And that stillness unsettles him. It interrupts the familiar pattern where he pulls away and you chase. Suddenly, the script he's always relied on doesn't play out the same way anymore. At first, he might feel confident in his distance. He may tell himself that he needs space or that he's no longer as interested. But as the silence stretches, something unexpected happens. He starts to feel the emptiness of your absence. He realizes that the space he thought would bring him peace now feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. Because when someone has grown used to your presence, your energy, your warmth, your silence is loud, it echoes in his thoughts. He starts noticing the absence of your messages, your good mornings, your gentle check-ins. The little things that seem so ordinary now feel like a void. Silence creates scarcity, and scarcity creates value. It's human psychology. We tend to appreciate things more when they're no longer easily accessible. When you were always available, he didn't have to earn your attention. It was simply there, comforting, reliable, effortless. But the moment you withdrew, that energy became rare, and in that rarity, its worth amplified. He begins to remember your laughter differently. He replays the moments you listened without judgment. He thinks about how you made him feel seen, understood, accepted. And that's when it hits him. Your silence isn't a game. It's a statement. This is the turning point. He starts to question his choices. The ego that once felt powerful now feels exposed. Because your silence takes away his control. It removes the comfort of knowing that you'll always be there, no matter what he does. Without that certainty, he begins to feel something he's not used to feeling. Vulnerability. He starts to ask himself, did I push too far? Did I lose her for good? Was she really that easy to replace? Those questions are uncomfortable but necessary. Because they wake him up. They make him realize that connection isn't guaranteed. It's earned. When you stay silent, you allow him to sit with those emotions. You don't interrupt his realization with reassurance. You don't soothe his guilt or feed his ego. You let him face himself, and that silence forces him to confront his true feelings without distraction. He might start rationalizing at first, telling himself that he just needed time, that maybe you'll reach out eventually. But as days turn into weeks, his logic begins to crumble under the weight of missing you. That's when reflection deepens. That's when curiosity turns into longing. But here's the beautiful part. Your silence isn't about revenge. It's not about making him suffer or proving a point. It's about returning to yourself. It's about reclaiming the energy you once poured into trying to be understood. Because before the silence, you were probably doing everything to make things work. You explained, you overgave, you showed up. You tried to bridge the emotional gap that he was creating. But silence ends that exhausting cycle. It's your way of saying, I've done my part. The rest isn't mine to carry. And in that decision, you find freedom. What happens next often surprises people. When you detach, the energy between you resets. He begins to feel drawn toward you again. Not because of manipulation, but because of balance. You've created an emotional contrast. Before, he felt your constant availability. Now he feels your absence. That contrast triggers curiosity. He wants to know where you went, emotionally, mentally, energetically. He starts to feel a sense of uncertainty. Did she stop caring? Has she moved on? And that uncertainty ignites pursuit. Men are instinctively wired to pursue what feels valuable and scarce. When your attention becomes something he has to earn, his respect for you deepens. He's no longer operating from comfort, he's operating from desire. He begins to chase, not because you demanded it, but because you inspired it through your restraint. He starts texting again, carefully at first. He might test your energy, trying to see if you'll respond the same way. But the woman you've become in silence is not the same woman who used to chase. You respond differently now.